Hello, YouTube. It's DasGregor. And guess what? I'm in FreeBSD. I did it. I blew away LFS and I installed FreeBSD. Now, before I get too serious about this, BSD is interesting. It's definitely different than LFS and Linux. I come from a Linux background. I don't know much about BSD. I do have a few people out there, though, who like it a lot, use it on a daily driver, and are very happy with it. Now, I'm running this on a Toshiba E205. It's an older laptop. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to install LFS, because I could do everything from source, and while it would take a lot longer to compile on an older system, I thought I could build it to be really efficient. Now with BSD, there have been a lot of hair pulling. So much hair pulling that I might be a little bolder up there. First off, the installation process, it went really well. It was very simple to install, clear, straightforward. Now, I tried in the beginning to keep my Gen 2 partition. If you remember in previous videos, we installed Gen 2 on the second partition and dual booted Gen 2 from the LFS. Now I knew that by blowing away LFS, I would in that way lose the grub configurations, and I was hoping that I could set up BSD to install and detect that Gen 2 was on the second partition and do its thing. That's what I would think that Linux would do. That did not work. No matter what I did. And before I get too crazy with this, I got to get off this screen. As you can see, I have the webcam working. For some reason, the webcam support is really flaky inside of BSD. And I'm not crazy about it at all. Let's see if we can. So I'll go over here to my terminal for now. See if I can remember how to make this. Maybe it's not. There we go. That way you can see DasGregor at FreeBSD. I've got my little icon here. I've only been up for 33 minutes. That's because I keep rebooting. I keep trying different things out. The installation failed miserably when I tried to do the dual boot with Gen 2. Now, you experienced BSD users might say, oh, DOS, you just don't know what you're doing. And you are correct. Give that man a QPL wise. Yes, I really don't know what I'm doing with BSD. And so from a noob standpoint, I could not make it work. I just gave up and said, you know what, forget it. I have a Clonezilla of the whole entire hard drive. Let's just blow it all away. So I did that. And of course, BSD, FreeBSD installed without incident and without problems. And I got pretty good at the install setup. Now I did use ZFS as the file system and instead of the UFS. Once I was inside of BSD, FreeBSD, I was very easily able to figure out the package system manager using PKG and searching for things such as, we'll say, Xorg. Put in your password. It finds stuff. It works. I did read the manual, but I made a big mistake when I read the manual. Once you get it all installed, it says a lot of you will want to get X running. So I clicked on the little link that did that and skipped some important things that talked to me about the ports and updating the ports and getting that set up. I ran into problems later on about that. We got it figured out, got it working. I would say FreeBSD for me is working at about 95%. It took a lot less time than doing, say, LFS. But I do have to say it was a lot more frustrating for me. And with FreeBSD, after I installed Xorg and set everything up for a GUI and went to test it, and it failed right out the box. I was quite impressed with LFS that after hours, if not days, of compiling and going, I sure hope after I'm done with all this that it actually works. After doing all that, my first test of Start X succeeded. I had a desktop environment, no problems at all. With FreeBSD, I had errors. Could not find my desktop. What I figured out was that on this laptop, it has an NVIDIA chip and it also has Intel. It's a Core i5. So you can see right here, Core i5 M460, 2.53 gigahertz. Dual core, 4 threads. One thing I am really unimpressed with is how much RAM it uses. When you first start up the machine, it uses almost 900 to a gig of RAM right off the bat, just in the command line interface. When I log into the system with i3, and I am running i3 of course here, which was excellent to get set up and install, no problems at all with that. I was still running about 1.6 gigs. Right now I have a browser open, my webcam is still open, the recording software, and PCMan FM. Now in LFS, I can have all of those things running and barely be using about 700-800 megs. So it is a lot more intensive on the memory. But I've got 8 gigs, I'm good, no big deal. Another problem I had was this has a touchpad Synaptics mouse, and the Synaptics mouse is okay, except for the fact it took me forever to figure out how to turn off tapping because it would keep sensing my palm or my fingers and then highlighting everything and blowing it all up. And so if I was in here, I'd be typing, or if I was in my IRC chat, I'd be typing, all of a sudden my scrolls would go crazy and the mouse would go nuts. And I had read a lot and figured out what to do, got it as best as I could. I got rid of tapping, but I still have a problem where if I double tap, tell me, it's not going to do it for me here. There, it did it. Well, the thing is, when I'm running around the mouse and da-da-da-da-da, and I'm 2 fingers scrolling, we'll go into something like /dot, something that has some scrolling. And we've got some scrolling, and then I'll accidentally hit it twice, and you saw it comes up. And the thing is, it's random. It's not like I can do it on my own. I'm not sure. I thought it was just double tapping it. I cannot figure out the life of me to get rid of double tapping. I got rid of single tapping. I have done all kinds of things with the sysctl, PSM to get rid of it. I can't seem to find any other programs that'll do it. That's driving me nuts. From a stability standpoint, I constantly feel like I am running into small issues. I have to use a USB headset to record this video, for instance, because of the way this is set up. With the 2 3.5mm jacks, I don't have a headset that has a microphone that's on one and a headset on the other. So I have to use this. The only way I can get USB sound to work is to create some scripts. So if we go back in here, we go into my scripts directory, because I always start writing scripts. Oh my, that's hard to read like that. Oh well, it's not that important, I suppose. So we can make it a little bit larger. Right. And by the way, I did try XFCE first, so just to try to make things look a little bit easier, I am using the XFCE terminal. So let's change our colors real quick to something maybe a little bit easier to read. Black and white maybe be fine. Yeah, there we go. It's just for the video anyway. So Of course, I've got my i3 edit reset, i3 status edit stuff, my IRC scripts that go ahead and start all that for me. I had to create audio reset and audio USB, and pretty much all that that is doing is setting the default to this, or setting it back to 0 for the internal. I had to do that because BSD will not automatically figure out that I've plugged in a USB headset and just use it. Linux did that. LFS did that. I don't want to turn it into this versus that. But I guess my biggest beef is that I am so used to doing things in Linux that I know the Linux ways, and I know that things work so perfectly well for the way I have set them up, and I've done it for so many years that it's second nature. And I am in a, I shouldn't say I'm in a, I am out of my environment with BSD. So it just doesn't work as well for me. Those little things like the audio issues, the mouse issues, the fact that I still end up with a few errors when I'm at command line interface. Every once in a while, I'll boot the system and it won't set up properly my wireless. Now, I was impressed that it did set up wireless on the go in the install. That is a real plus. I don't know how many Linux distributions I have gone into and they won't work with the wireless setup. And if this one worked, I was able to actually exit into the chroot at the end and install a few things and set up a few things. Yeah, so that was all good. The other thing I had to do there was to get X working, I had to go into, and this is another thing, learning where things are put in BSD is so much different. If user local etc x11 xorg.conf, it's like whatever happened to etc x11 xorg.conf instead of this long string, any which way. Driver intel is what I had to set up. And what I had to do to make it work was set card 0 Intel PC. This is the stickler. Now, what I figured out, I'm going to try TrueOS next because I want to see if it gives me a better experience setting everything up for me. Once again, trying to set things up and you're not familiar with the environment, I'm sure I've screwed up a lot. I hate to give any type of review or discussion about something because I don't know what I'm exactly doing. And this is like setting any operating system to someone who just has just a hint of what he should do. And unfortunately, a really good idea of what would be done in a different OS, but you've got to learn to do it in this particular OS. So because this has two different video cards, I had to figure out what the bus ID was of my Intel and specifically mention that inside of this file here. It would then see properly the right video card. Now, for some reason, this system's NVIDIA card, I don't like to use it. It seems like every time I try, I think it's been damaged due to heat. And so I always use the Intel. And with the Intel, if we did something like GLX Gears, we should be getting at least 30 to 60 frames. I mean, I was getting 60 frames per second earlier. I'm getting 73 right now. So, yeah, that's fine. That's good. And that runs fine. So with Intel, I'm not lacking in anything. I'm not losing anything by going with that. Everything that I have found so far with FreeBSD, it works well. I was able to get, of course, Mahjong. If any of you guys followed my talk with LFS, I got Mahjong set up. I also got, oh, my mind, I swear. I got a few games working, and they ran fine. They install fine. I really like BSD's ports and the way it sets things up. I like, for instance, that it gives me the option just to do a package install, or I can actually go to the ports and do a make install. Now, that being said, I did try to set up v4l utils. v4l utils would install properly using the package, but I wanted QV4L too. I made sure that I had Qt set up. I made sure I had all the prerequisites all configured and ready to go. But every time I would try to install it, it would not install QV4L2. I went into the source code and would try to compile it with the instructions given for QV4L2, and it would compile and get almost to the end, and then it would just crash for no known reason and fail. So I gave up with that. That's why I am using, if we go back here, we have this right here. This is Webcamoid. I think I said that right. I had to use the Webcam D drivers, and I was able to get those working. But that's another thing. You know, once I set up the webcam in Linux, I never had issues. But with this one here, I have to create a script and call it Webcam. And what that does is just run webcam d-d and the location of where my webcam is. If we look at my loader, and that's what really throws me, is going to boot for loader. I'm looking into Etsy for that, and I'm constantly wanting to type that first. So we've got our splash, we've got our little beastie for the logo. I put in, of course, the i915 for Intel. ZFS, of course, is already there. I've got the Q's load set up, and then in, let's see here, cat/Etsy and rc.conf. We've got all that set up, and we've got the webcam D enabled, but for some reason it won't work unless I configure it and run that thing. And maybe there's something in there that tells me that, oh, you always got to do that. I guess my thing is, I'm used to Linux always just doing it for me. Even in LFS, with compiling everything, it just was smart enough to know that it was there and available. Without running that, if I do an ls on dev, video 0 doesn't exist. What that webcam D does is create the file for me. And of course, it runs it as a service. So I have it going ahead and running right over here, for instance, to get that working. But it is what it is. I ran into so many little issues that luckily some things I was able to figure out, some things that I just couldn't, and I've just gotten to a point where it's like, you know what, I'm not going to bother. I'm probably doing something wrong. FreeBSD is used by a lot of different companies. It has a great following. It's a wonderful operating system. I feel part of my issues could be hardware. Part of it, of course, is that I'm just not familiar with BSD. I really hoped that I would get this running and it would be just like LFS and I would run with it for a while. But what I feel is that FreeBSD, even for this seasoned Gen 2 user who ran LFS flawlessly for over 3 months, he has a lot more learning to do. And as I've always said to new Linux users even, don't jump into Gen 2 as your first OS or your first experience with Linux. Gen 2 is not meant for the new user. I'm not saying that it's meant for the superior user. I'm just saying that installing Gen 2 and being dropped off at a command line interface can be daunting. I threw myself into FreeBSD and got dropped off at the command line interface just as well, but at least with my experience with Gen 2, I knew where to search, I knew what to look for, and I found the right answers to get moving and to be able to get X11, i3, a lot of things functioning. Yeah, everything that normal operating systems would do, I've got it working here. That's why I say I've got 95% running, and it's pretty good. I'm just not happy with those few little things, such as the mouse. And possibly if I put an external mouse, that would fix that problem, probably almost immediately. The other issues that I still have problems with, just how flaky the webcam does work, how much RAM it's using, how sometimes the system just kind of starts to act up on me, and it hasn't crashed. The only panic I got with it was when I screwed up. I did something in my rc.conf. I messed up something bad enough that when it tried to boot, it panicked and said, "Oh, sorry, no, this is no good." And I almost just had to give it all up. Now, I did boot into the live CD. I mounted my ZFS pool, or ZFS pool, and I failed at being able to see the operating system to be able to fix that one file. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I just had no way of knowing what to do to get into the OS file system. And while I found some great resources online, in fact, I had one of them bookmarked. I'm sure I did that once before. It's been a couple years. But what I did find out was I was able to boot normal, and instead of booting into the system, go into the advanced features, and then tell it not to load that particular driver that I told it to load that was crashing it. And then it was able to go past it. I get logged on. And then I was able to reset my rc.conf, take out the junk that I did. I was trying to fix the screen. It comes off awfully ugly. I'm using it goes default to 640 by 480, and so somewhere it suggested I try Visa, and I probably screwed up and didn't have Visa set up properly. It tried to load it, crashed it, and that's what it did. But like I said, I was able then to tell it don't load Visa, and then tell it boot, and then it went ahead and went past that point. Didn't panic. I was able to take that line out of my rc.conf, and I was peachy keen all over again. If you don't know how to fix something, don't play with it. But one of the biggest things is if you break it, learn to fix it. Don't just start all over. So, yeah, everything's pretty good. It's BSD. So, I'm not really sure what more to talk about. This has been, unfortunately, it looks like 22 minutes of me babbling. I wanted to go ahead and at least do a video within FreeBSD, talk about some of my frustrations, some of the things that really bugged me, that took a bit to overcome. Now, by the time I got to my IRC channel and I'm talking with my guys, 99% of everything that was like, I couldn't get this, couldn't get that, da 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 da. I'd already researched, figured it out, and got it running, and everything's fine. Oh, another thing, I was trying to set up my network shares. I'm used to doing my network shares within the FS tab. Now, I read through the documentation, I set it all up. Every single time it wants to connect, it wants to ask me my password. I hate that. So I tried setting it up with the -N and then creating the .nsmbrc file. No matter what I did, no matter how I set that up, it would constantly say authentication error. I finally just gave up and said if I really want my network resources, I'll just go ahead and put my password in every time I have to do it. It's not like I reach out to the network that often. But it just bugged me because it's so easy to do that in Linux. I never had problems. I set a password, I created credentials equals wherever that is, where it's secure and locked down and encrypted so that no one else can read it. And it just works. I don't have issues. But with this, I couldn't get that. The list goes on. If I sat here and talked about it too much more, I'm sure I'd go, oh yeah, and this, and oh yeah, and that. The thing is, I want to try BSD a version. I'm going to go to TrueOS. That used to be PC BSD. Now, I already have booted up the live DVD on it, and of course it failed. It blew up immediately. And so that tells me that there is definitely an issue with my hardware. Now, what I had to do with it to get it to work, just to make sure that it would function, was edit the xorg.conf and make sure, like I showed you in that previous area, about adding the bus ID for Intel and setting it up for Intel. It does want to default to NVIDIA, and NVIDIA on this thing just doesn't work well. In fact, every time I would set up to NVIDIA, it would overheat and die when it was even Linux. So I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to stay with the good and true Intel drivers for the Core i5. So if it's morning, evening, noon, or night, I hope I didn't disappoint y'all. I hope I didn't make y'all upset with me about the fact that DOS doesn't do BSD. He's just no good. Yeah, it just goes back to my previous statement. If you're new to an OS, you don't start with one of the more complicated versions of it. You look for something that's easier to get your feet wet to learn. As I was saying about new users jumping into Gen 2, for instance, no, I always tell brand new users of Linux to go to Ubuntu or Mint. Those two are my two go-tos for I'm a noob, I know nothing, let's just try it out. Because that's going to install without headache 99.999% of the time. And you're going to be able to get things working much easier without having to look under the hood and configuring a bunch of things that you just don't understand. It just works. You know, that whole keep it simple. And so I feel the DOS should try a version of BSD that maybe sets things up for him right away. One of two things is going to happen. I'll install True OS, and everything will still be flaky and crappy and won't work. And I'll know, hey, yay, on one hand it wasn't me, boo. It's not to DOS standards. Or two, it'll all work much better. It'll function properly. I'll be able to configure everything that I want to configure without too much headache. And I'll realize it's because DOS didn't know how to configure his system properly. And while he knew how to tinker, he knew how to tinker just enough to get her where it's at. I was really excited about trying BSD, but right now I think I will try some different flavors, see how they behave. I'll try them. If they work out and they look like they're running for a couple days, I'll try it, do kind of a comparison. If they all work perfectly, I'll definitely say, hey, I'll come back. So you guys come back and look at the next video next week, just to see if DOS says I'm the fault. Or no, it's just not ready, or not really that it's not ready, but it's got to be hardware. I know I did a FreeBSD video 2 years ago, and I know I gave it great remarks. I have not gone back to watch that video, and I have slept many times since then, so I have forgotten a lot of things. But it must have been pretty good for me to say, approved. I am very hard to please. I am a very stickler about the smallest of things working, and I like to make sure that everything functions to my standard. So I need to make sure that it's not me. And unfortunately, all the research I've done online has not helped me so far in the last 3 or 4 days to figure out what I have done wrong to make it better. So I need to find a version of BSD that's going to help me learn those things. And maybe once I do, if TrueOS works great, everything is functional, I know what config files to look at and say, okay, how did you do it? Because I need to know. Of course, I already know I have to edit the Xorg.conf. So that's not a good sign. And as I repeat myself, if it's morning, evening, noon, or night, whatever you're having, have a great one. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more BSD. And in 3 or 4 weeks, I do want to look at Ubuntu 18.04 to see what they have done with GNOME. Did they turn GNOME into Unity? Or did they just go ahead and embrace GNOME as it is and install their stable OS on it or with it? Thanks, guys. Bye.